We covered the first three sections last night: the physiology of fear, the stages of fear, and then, well, I say three, I guess we covered four: the objects of fear, and then we talked about the sources of fear last night. So those four subjects, four categories we covered last night. If you were not here last night, you can go on to the YouTube channel and you'll be able to catch up on those, because those have been streamed onto YouTube. These will be streamed on YouTube as well, and so any of them that you anything you missed today, or if you feel like, man, I want to go back and review that section, just go on to the church YouTube channel, OKC Baptist Church. No, it's Beth Haven Baptist Church, Oklahoma City is the YouTube channel. So you'll be able to find those right on there. And you say, well, why did I even come? Why didn't I just stay home and watch it on YouTube? Because you wouldn't have done it. You'd have got distracted by something. Plus, you wouldn't have got that fancy book you got right there. Think about that. Yeah? And there are some things in there that you're going to need here in a little while. So if you stayed home to watch this on YouTube, you're going to miss some stuff that you're not going to get on YouTube. All right? But we're going to move on this morning into really just two sections. It's just two things that we're going to deal with this morning. They just happen to be really lengthy two things, and so they'll take us most of this morning. But I promise you this, I won't prolong purposefully. All right? We'll deal with it efficiently and thoroughly, but we won't just try and take extra time. The section we're going to begin this morning with is, let's see here, it was right there, destructive coping mechanisms. Destructive coping mechanisms. And this section, I actually took this just verbatim from a study that's called Taking Time to Quiet Your Soul by Jim Berg. And actually the first section I took from him also, the physiology of fear, from his study. The same study. It's a good study, and if you wanted to get it online, it covers from a different aspect, and it kind of goes in a lot of different directions, but these two things I felt like were good and applicable. Yes? It's right in the material at the front of that section. It says it right there, and it would be helpful to you, I know. You can get it on, you have to go to their website, bjupress.com or something like that. You can look at Bob Jones University Press. That's who published it. And I will warn you, just to buy that, if you buy the DVDs set and the workbook that goes with it, it's like $164, not counting shipping. All right, so it's a fairly good amount for that, but it's good material, and I believe it'd be a help to you if you have the opportunity to get it. All right. So, destructive coping mechanisms. These sources produce many that we just talked about last night. The sources of fear produce a lot of destructive mechanisms that we try and cope with, that people employ to avoid the things that we fear, and we act out in a way that is seemingly unrelated, sometimes most often, I guess I would say it, to mask our fear. And so we do things to try and overcome our fear, but they're harmful things that we do to ourselves and others. Number one, there it talks about obsessions are unrestrained doubts. Obsessions begin with attempts to control the uncertainty by thinking through the problems and its possibilities. We become obsessed with our fear, and the obsession of our fear causes us to try and think through ways to manage our fear or to control the circumstances so that the fear is not able to overcome us in a sense, all right? And so that obsession with the fearful thing, it causes us to begin to make certain other decisions, all right? Obsession begins with the thinking, but then it goes on. It says the uncertainties can be normal concerns of daily life, or, and I like this statement, junk thoughts generated by the evil heart within all of us. So, normal concerns would be things that everyone would encounter. Junk thoughts, we all encounter junk thoughts as well, but junk thoughts are kind of off the wall, irregularly wicked thoughts, irregularly sinful thoughts. By the way, everyone has junk thoughts. Everybody does. All right? And I want to make that really clear because Satan would like to convince us that you're the only one that's ever had that kind of a horrible, wicked thought. And then you begin to think that maybe there's something really strangely wrong with you because you had that kind of thought. There must be something really, really, really wrong with me that I would have a thought like this. And then you begin to overanalyze every thought that you have and begin to create a downward spiral because of your negative thinking, sometimes because of just one irregular junk thought. All right? And we'll talk more about that in just a few minutes, but some examples of this obsessive thinking, of fearful thinking that becomes an obsession in our thinking, and the types of results of it. First of all, can create a lot of doubts about health. And you're going to listen to a lot of what-ifs through this particular section, but things like, oh, I forgot, yeah, that's a horrible situation right there. At that point, the prayer that you pray is, bless my, oh Lord, bless my soul and all that is within me. So all right. Doubts about health. Doubts about health. What if I have cancer? What if I have a tumor? It's not a tumor. Right? What if I have an incurable or undiscovered disease? What if? What if there are germs on my hands and my body? Well, there are. There are. All right. What if I'm not fully disinfected? What if I'm losing my mind? I have such crazy thoughts and feelings. Right? Concerns and doubts about our health. Obsession about our health because of fear. Right? The hypochondria type scenario where I have everything. You know, they say that when people go through medical school, they go through this as they're learning about various different diseases, and they begin to start evaluating themselves in relationship to the symptoms and going, man, I have some of those symptoms. You know, maybe I have this, maybe I have that, maybe I have, and the reality is sometimes because of fear, we get obsessed with that type of a scenario, and we certainly have a culture that is very obsessed with health. Very obsessed with health. And the idea that, you know, and I would say this, having raised 4 children, okay, the paranoia that exists in our day about babies and germs is absolutely ridiculous. Babies need germs. Babies need that to build their immune system. And part of the reason I think that we have such sickly culture is because we have children who never were allowed to build their immune system. We tried to protect them from every germ, and now they're susceptible to everything. I mean, you need to take that baby right out of the hospital, sit it down, let it start eating dirt. All right? Because it'll help build immunity in the baby, but we're so obsessed with this idea of germs and stuff that it actually has hindered us. And part of the biggest issue we have now with health, and doctors will tell you this, is that we've overprescribed antibiotics to the point where we've created germs that are much stronger than they used to be because we have overprescribed the antibiotics and so forth. And so a lot of doctors actually are now to the point where they don't prescribe anything until you're about to die. And the reason is because of this obsession with health, a fear of sickness. Okay? Doubts about driving. What if I run over someone and kill them? What if I have another panic attack but this time while I'm driving? What if I have an accident or injure or kill one of my passengers? And what if this and what if that? Years ago, my second daughter, we took her out to the country down, I think we were down 104th out the other side, back before there were many houses out that way, the other side of I-44, and got her in the driver's seat and said, okay, we're going to drive down the road. And she's driving down the road, and there was a fairly narrow bridge, but it was passable for two vehicles, but it was narrow. But a car came, and they really were too far into the line, to be honest with you. And in reaction, she went right into the guardrails, right, and just ran the guardrails down the side of our vehicle. What a blessing, right? And of course, she was all weirded out and scared and all that, and she pulled. I said, okay, pull over, and I got out and I looked and had to take a couple deep breaths, and she was crying, and I went around and hugged her, and I said, it's going to be okay. And she said, I never want to drive again. I almost killed everybody. And she's going off. And I made her get back in the driver's seat. And even though she didn't want to, I made her drive right after that because, otherwise she might spend her rest of her life in fear of that stuff all the time. She needed to get back behind that wheel and drive and realize that it was just an accident. Accidents happen. She didn't take us off into the ravine. Praise God. She didn't take us into the other vehicle. We were all safe. Everything was okay. It's just a little paint. Right? But accidents can cause people to, you have a car accident, and it can become a great fear, the idea of getting behind the wheel again. What if something happens again? Doubts about responsibilities. What if I don't remember reading every word of the assignment? I don't want to lie. What if taking 2 samples at the grocery store is considered stealing? What if I make a mistake in my cooking and poison the family? What if I'm not doing a good enough job for the boss and he's about to fire me? What if I didn't repent enough? What if I'm not really saved? What if I have committed the unpardonable sin? And what if this and what if that? And ideas or doubts about all the responsibilities can cause a person to just be completely messed up in their thinking and stressed and anxious all of the time because of this what-if thinking about all kinds of various issues. Doubts about physical safety. What if I didn't lock the doors properly and someone gets in and kills us all? What if I didn't turn off the gas burner on the stove and the house burns up? What if I didn't turn off the iron? What if my husband is trying to poison me? What if I let my daughter drive to work or go to camp and she's killed in an accident? What if I accidentally drown my infant son giving him a bath in the bathtub? What if you say, well, some of those are, no, I'm saying these are things people seriously struggle with. And none of those may have been your thing, but doubts about your physical safety certainly abound, and there's definitely a significant amount of things that can harm us. And that what-if thinking can cause us to withdraw ourselves. Listen, I know people who absolutely will not fly. Will not fly. Won't go, and so they don't go a lot of places because what if the plane crashes? Well, Thousands of planes fly every day and don't crash. But what if? More car accidents happen, more people are killed in car accidents than planes. What if? Right? And we can get to the point where we limit ourselves from doing anything with what if thinking. Right? I'm not going to fly in a plane because it may crash. I'm not going to drive a car because it may crash. I'm not going to take public transportation because there's sick people on there and I might get germs. And I'm not going to do this. What if this and what if that? And it can really affect our decisions and what we do. Doubts about situations out of our control. What if I get sick during the service and vomit before I can leave the room? I'm okay because I'm up there most of the time. But people around you might not be okay. I don't know. What if? What if the elevator gets stuck and I'm confined for hours? What if I get fast food poisoning from eating someone else's house or restaurant or church potluck? What if? What if my son goes to a Christian college and surrenders to go to the mission field and then I don't see him again very often? Or maybe he dies in a foreign mission field. What if my daughter marries a guy and then moves to another state where I can't see them and my grandchildren every day? What if the plane goes through turbulence and I go crazy in front of everyone? What if? I can't control those things. And so I have these fears and doubts and so forth. Doubts about my own self-control. What if I listen to that voice inside my head and do drive off the bridge or ram that person next to me? What if I give in to an impulse and murder my children? What if I can't restrain myself and yell out profanity at church? What if I actually act out a nightmare that I murdered my parents? What if I gave into an impulse to remove my clothing and run outside? That would be more of a nightmare than a... What if I have a nervous breakdown? What if I forget who I am? What if no one can figure out my identity? That's true. What if I impulsively grab the person I'm talking to and kiss them? What if I give in to the impulse to pull the fire alarm? I mean, we could just go on and on with some of these, couldn't we? Just these what-if scenarios. Are they accomplishing anything? No. They're just doubts. They're negative ways, coping mechanisms. Doubts about our relationships. What if my boss is trying to make me look bad so they can fire me? What if my spouse is cheating on me? What if my teenager is sexually active or doing drugs and the spirituality that I think I'm seeing is just a sham? What if my fiance only wants a mistress to sleep with but doesn't really love me? What if my wife rejects me when I start going bald? What if I never get married? What if my spouse never changes and I'm trapped in a bad relationship forever? What happens is that we scare ourselves with our negative thoughts. You meditate upon uncertainties, possibilities, and you create imaginary crisis. We talked about this some last night as we went through the stages of fear, how anxiety over a potential problem creates the problem in our mind that we become fearful of, even though it may or may not even be present. Your body interprets every imaginary crisis of your mind as an emergency and kicks into action, and legitimately you're just killing yourself with your own thoughts. then not only is there obsessive, unrestrained doubts, but there's bizarre obsessions that occur when common junk thoughts of the sinful nature come into our mind. Possibly sexually perverse or violent thoughts are processed through a heart that's already habitually anxious and full of doubts. We become fearful because, we do have that thought of, I'd like to really just punch them right in the face. Why would I think that? Right? How could I think like that? These evil thoughts are immediately dismissed by a mature believer as a reminder that our heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? And we thank God that for the reality check, and also thank God for the grace that's available to refrain me from actually doing the things that my heart thoughts come up with. Okay? And praise God that I don't have to do everything that pops into my mind. Amen? But the doubting, anxious heart takes these intrusive thoughts as just one more uncertainty in an already unsettled world. In an attempt to keep themselves from, to keep their life from getting out of control, they now worry, what if I actually go through with this? By the way, you might not have this issue, but I've counseled many people that have come for counseling for this. I have these thoughts. What if I actually did that? Instead of dismissing that thought. Saying, well, that's a dumb thought. I'm not going to do that. That would be wrong. They begin to focus, attach a bizarre obsession upon it. Since I've thought it, am I destined to do it? If so, when am I going to do it? Something must be wrong with me. No one in his right mind would ever consider this type of thing. I can't let anybody know that I think these things. I'd be fired from my job and disciplined out of my church, and my spouse would leave me, and my kids would hate me. All that type of stuff. Because of just bizarre thinking. These kinds of internal questions reveal much about a person's lack of understanding about the human heart. And the Bible is very clear. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Out of the heart proceed evil thoughts. Say, well, everybody has those? Yeah. Everybody has evil thoughts. Everyone has wrong thinking. What you have to do is learn to mature in Christ to the point where you take those evil thoughts and you say, nope, not going to think about that. We're going to talk more about that extensively here this morning. But obsessive thoughts are common reactions of the normal mind, people to seemingly overwhelming challenges and doubts when they don't know God well. They're not crazy. They're overwhelmed with life's problems and spiritually unprepared to face them. All right? And since this person doesn't have a solution to their dilemma, the thoughts can seem to plague them when they return again and again as unsolved mysteries. Why do I keep having this thought? And when finally they discuss them with someone, a lot of times they're likely to be told, well, you're being plagued by demons, and or you have a brain that's broken, or you must have, and here's a great one, a chemical imbalance that is creating this thinking, these thoughts in you. Remember what we said very first? Chemicals don't produce thoughts. Chemicals don't produce thoughts. Thoughts affect our body, but our body doesn't produce thinking. Thinking's done in the heart. All right? So, if we see a physician, maybe that physician prescribes anti-anxiety medication to slow down our thinking and such things as this. The behind-the-scenes real story is that this is a result of sowing and reaping. Galatians chapter number 6, verse 7 and 8 says, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever man soweth, that shall he also reap. If ye sow to the flesh, ye shall of the flesh reap corruption. But if ye sow to the Spirit, ye shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And be not weary in well-doing," verse number 9 goes on, "for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not." Now here's the problem with this type of thinking. If you indulge this type of thinking, and even act in certain areas, act out in areas you think you can get away with it in, it will enhance this type of thinking. The mind is a muscle. Okay? The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. If you quit reading, and you quit studying, and you quit doing things to challenge your thinking, you will slowly stop thinking. Your mind will atrophy. You won't be able to think like you used to think. Right? And so we have to keep our mind thinking, but at the same time, we have to keep our mind thinking in the right direction and not the wrong direction. Because if I exercise myself in a wrong thing, I will become more prone to that wrong thing. The wrong way of doing things. The wrong way of thinking. And so I have to learn a discipline that says, no, that's wrong thinking. I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to go this direction. We're going to talk more about that here in just a few minutes, so I'm not going to go on any further. But James chapter number 1, verse number 14 and 15 begins to be played out so often in people's minds there, that when lust is conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and when sin is finished, it bringeth forth death. And that lust, sin, death process of our thinking is what leads us down those roads that we seem to get into these scenarios where I'm bombarded constantly with this type of thinking. That's because you gave in to spending time thinking about those things. The more time you spend with what-if thinking, the worse your what-if thinking will become. The more time you spend with lustful thinking, thinking of sexual immorality, the more sexual immorality will be on your mind. The more you fantasize and indulge in that type of thinking, the more you think about violence, the more violence will be on your mind. You understand what I'm saying? You exercise yourself in that area, and you're going to reap more of that thinking. That's why it's important that we have a control of our mind, that we bring it into obedience. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit when we get into that last section more specifically. How to bring our mind into control. But our lusts produce sinfulness, and our sinfulness produces death, and we have to stop it back into the early parts of that thinking process. Number 5, they're obsessive or anxious thoughts. Keep the automatic nervous system on high alert. Much body chemistry is being changed with the result of greater agitation, feelings of panic, and thus greater uncertainty and doubts, and consequently a return to the obsessive, anxious thoughts to try and solve the increased agitation. In the meantime, the automatic nervous system may be triggering panic attacks and causing other maladies diagnosed as stress-related. Number 6, unbiblical responses to uncertainty produce anxiety, which if not dealt with can easily move to obsessive thinking. Obsessive thinking is at the root of compulsive behavior, and that's what we'll talk about next. Here's a little encouragement for you. Don't let worry get you down. Remember, Moses started out as a basket case. Yeah. Anxiety. All right. So those are some unbiblical responses or wrong coping mechanisms, destructive coping mechanisms. Let's talk about a couple more. Perfectionistic behavior. Perfectionistic behavior. Now, let me specify this. You do not have to be a perfectionist in every area of your life to allow perfectionism to influence your life. Right? There are some people that are absolutely perfectionistically obsessed with certain aspects of life, and other areas of their life are just a complete wreck. Right? But in their mind, if they can control every aspect of this area, everything's okay. Right? Perfectionistic behaviors are characterized by a preoccupation with orderliness in one or more areas of life in order to control the sense of vulnerability and to extinguish the doubts. They're most often driven by fear of losing control and accompanied by the pride of accomplishment when successful. Perfectionistic controlling behaviors include several things, and I think that the statement there, controlling, and we use the term perfectionist in description of this, but the phrase controlling is probably a more apt and appropriate thing to use because it really points out the inherent flaw here. Because in the mind, when we are involved in these type of things, we say, well, being perfect is good. There's nothing wrong with doing things right. There's nothing wrong with doing them better, right? And we justify it, but the reality is that the end result is an attempt to control. And most generally, it's not just controlling my own set of circumstances, but it's controlling everyone involved in those things. And it becomes, to a large extent, either a lot of manipulation or a lot of anger as a result. So, I'm 4 questions, but no one can hear them out there and we're recording, so hold your questions till we're on break, if you don't mind. Thank you. So, preoccupation with some things here. Preoccupation with physical appearances in order. I must dress myself and my children in matching outfits and accessories. I must not wear the same clothes within a 3-week rotation. I fail at that myself, right? If my wife and I are anything appearing alike, it's by accident, complete accident. But there's some people, I mean, they won't leave the house if they can't all be perfectly appareled. I must not wear anything that shows I'm not up to the latest fashion. I must not be seen anywhere without my makeup. And I feel that way personally, but I must not wear clothes that are not perfectly pressed or shoes that are not perfectly polished. Now, let me throw in here that there is a balance, right? Please press your clothes. Take care of your appearance. But there's a difference between being mindful about being presentable in a general sense and being obsessed with your appearance. There's a difference. All right? Preoccupation with keeping your surroundings in order. I must always have a perfectly clean house. I know people literally that do a white glove inspection on their own houses. Think about that. Just don't come do that at my office. I will use a Q-tip and a toothbrush if necessary. I have known of ladies who literally have scrubbed the grout in their entire home with toothbrushes to make sure that they are all perfectly clean. Colors, no discoloration. I mean, it's extensive, very extensive. I must vacuum the house at least 3 times a day to be really clean. I must have all the books on the bookshelf in precise alphabetical order and sitting with the same distance from the spine of the books to the outer edge of the shelf. Sometimes we call things like this OCD, right? Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. I personally am CDO. It's just like OCD, but it's in alphabetical order. So, just kidding. If you ever go in my office, you'll know I'm not. I must rotate the furniture in every room often enough so that the carpet wears evenly in all places. I must not let anyone think that the carpet is worn excessively in one spot. I must redecorate the Christmas tree so that it's perfect after the kids have tried to decorate it. I must have the absolute perfect Christmas gift for everyone at Christmas, or I have failed to show them that I love them. I must stack every piece of clothing in my dresser or drawer so that they are precisely uniform. I must arrange everything in my closet so that all the hangers go the same direction and the blouses are arranged by color in an order of the rainbow. I must not allow anyone to touch anything on my desk, stapler, note cards, letter opener, and so forth. I want to know precisely where they are at all times. I am the master of what is around me, and nothing can be out of order. Everything has to be perfect. These people are often incredibly stressed out. All right? Perfection with keeping performance in order. I must practice more than the teacher requires so that I can play my violin piece perfectly for my next lesson. I cannot miss a single note. I must know ahead of time if I'm going to accompany the song service at church. I will not play if there's a chance I might mess something up. I must hit all the baskets whenever I shoot in the game. I must have a clear desk and an inbox before I allow myself to go home at night. I must work 50 to 60 hours a week to show the boss I'm not a slacker. I must send a birthday card to every relative every year if I'm to consider myself to have a good testimony in the family. I must take time to look through every newspaper and magazine for coupons so that I'm a good steward of my money. A performance-based perfectionism. By the way, if you feel like you have to work 50 to 60 hours a week to show you're not a slacker, please fill out an application for me. Just kidding. Kind of. A lot of times perfectionists won't do things they're able to do because they're not sure they can do them perfectly. And so they won't start things. A perfectionist will have a dozen things that they've never started, but they intend to, but they're not going to start it until they absolutely know that they can do it perfectly. So they just don't even start. And so often people who are great procrastinators are actually masking perfectionism. They put stuff off thinking, well, I can't do it perfectly, so I'm not even going to try. All right? I saw a bunch of people looking at each other at that point. Preoccupation with keeping schedules and responsibilities in order. I must plan out every day in 10-minute increments if I'm to be a good steward of my time. I must keep a list of everything I have done each and every day so that my husband will appreciate the freedom he gives me to be a stay-at-home mom, or my wife will appreciate the good labor that I do when I'm at work. You ever seen a Franklin Covey organizer? All right? It's not a bad tool if that's what it is, but I actually know a guy who has one for every day of his life since he was, I think, 19. And everything he's done every day of his life within 10, 15-minute increments is recorded on his bookshelf and kept in numerical order on his bookshelf. I don't remember what I did 20 minutes ago, to be honest with you. But I'm saying that can be a preoccupation, a focus, a perfectionist issue. I must keep the kids on a strict schedule for everything from the time they wake up until the time they go to bed. I can't be at church at 5 o'clock because their nap is here. And I can't do this because the kids have to have their bath at this time. It must be at this time. And no other time will work because I have to have control of their time. I must raise and provide for my family in the Walton style. I have to bake all my own bread, milk my own goats, sew my own clothes, grow my own vegetables, raise my own meat, can my own fruits and vegetables. Right? I have to control everything that comes into our home in this fashion. Now, I enjoy doing many of those things, by the way. But there's a difference between enjoying doing some of those things and being obsessed that you cannot do it any other way. Preoccupation with keeping spiritual disciplines in order. I must be sure to do my devotions every day, or God will judge me for my unfaithfulness. Now, I will say this. You ought to do devotions every day. If you don't spend time with the Lord every day, you're going to end up being in a fleshly thinking mode.
Yes, sir.
All right? But I ought not do my devotions because if I don't, God hates me. You understand the difference? I do it because it's good for me spiritually. It helps me spiritually. But not because God's going to hate me if I don't do it. Or disapprove of me even. It's not about God's approval or disapproval. It's about my own personal maintaining of my spiritual thinking. I must volunteer for absolutely every need that's announced at church, or I'm not being a servant to others. I must be sure that my children always behave in church, or I'm showing that I'm not a good parent. I must be out of fellowship with God today because I feel a bit down. I need to read my Bible more until I feel good again. I don't like feeling down, and we get preoccupied with the what instead of the who. And that becomes a problem. Preoccupation with keeping finances in order. I must spend whatever time is necessary on the internet to be sure that the model appliance that I'm purchasing I get for the absolute best value. If I spend one dime more, I'm a bad steward. Right? I must stay up all night if necessary to find a 5-cent discrepancy in the checkbook this month. I must not throw out any magazines, newspapers, or junk mail because there may be a time when I really need some of the information in it. And these folks sometimes, listen, in all of these areas can cause a person to get to the point. We think of hoarders as being just dirty, but a lot of times it starts because of a perfectionist mindset that they can't get rid of anything that they may need at some point, and so they organize. And a lot of times, I know that show Hoarders shows a lot of disorganization, but in their own way, hoarders are usually very organized. They know exactly where everything is. And that's kind of a strange thought. I had an aunt, a great aunt, who was a hoarder. And she had been married, not divorced. She got married, and her first husband passed away of cancer. She got married again. Her second husband passed away, and she got married a third time, and that husband passed away. And each time she ended up owning 3 homes. And after her first husband passed away, she had a large farm, a large barn, basement, and all kinds of stuff, and some cars. And when she ended up passing away, not one of those homes could you walk through without little trails going through. Not dirty, just packed to the gills with everything. She never threw away a yogurt cup, an egg carton, a newspaper. There was a car that she had stacked, and she would put them by month and wrap the newspaper, tie the newspapers, and stack them in the car. You could go back all the way back to her early married years, and every day of the newspaper published in that town was there. Every single one. In one house, this is kind of a weird thing, but in one house they found when they got into the basement, that particular husband had owned a car dealership, a Studebaker dealership. And he had made their basement into a parts surplus storage. And she didn't care about any of that. And when he passed away, the walls were shelved and lined with brand new in-the-box Studebaker parts. And she just piled stuff all around it. So when they went down into the basement, they found a warehouse full of brand new Studebaker parts in the basement. Yeah. So anyway, but it was a perfectionist behavior that she just had to control everything. She couldn't waste anything, and so everything had to be absolutely kept, preserved, and controlled. I must not throw out magazines, newspapers, junk mail, because there may come a time when I need some of the information. I'm going to throw out any shipping cartons or cardboard boxes or anything that I buy in case I have to return it in years to come. I must not discard any fabric or trim scraps from sewing just in case I need them for some reason in the future. I must find a job that makes better money. I owe it to my family. I must check my stock hourly on the internet, or we might even throw in this, check Facebook hourly on the internet to make sure that I'm not losing money or losing friends, I guess. I think a lot of Baptists have this problem here with not throwing anything out. If you've ever gone into a Baptist church, there's always rooms that are stacked with everything that they've ever bought. I don't understand that. That's why we got a dumpster. Throw it away. All right. Preoccupation with keeping health in control. I must keep strict counting of my calorie intake, fat grams, refined carbs. If I gain 1 pound, God will be angry with me. You say, come on. I know people like that. I know people that believe if they were to gain 1 or 2 pounds, that God would literally judge them because they were not being diligent about keeping their health in control. I must make sure I take an absolute most healthful food supplements. I have no one to blame but myself if I get sick. Either I must have a room of my own at the company convention or I won't go. Can't be put in a situation where I might be sick and be in the room with someone else. A preoccupation with keeping relationships in order. I must not let my children ever question my decisions. It's the only way they'll learn to respect my position. I must spend every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter with my family. I must daily spend a minimum of 2 hours with each of the children or they will grow up to think I did not love them. I must call my daughter at college every day so she can see how much I love her. Compulsive behaviors. Compulsive behaviors are excessive, repetitive activities that seem to give temporary relief from obsessive thoughts that plague the mind. These behaviors are performed even when negative effects are experienced. Valuable time is wasted, relationships are destroyed, work performance declines, health is compromised, the spiritual life is hindered. This is the constant checking and rechecking and checking and rechecking and checking and rechecking of things. Often when we talk about OCD, this is really one of those things that we think of, that constant having to do the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over because the mind can't let it go. The mind can't accept that it was done good enough, right? Ritualistic behaviors, repeated hand washing, extended shower routines, checking and rechecking locks, stove controls, electric socket test answers, touching certain items in a precise sequence before leaving a room, or performing certain routines before driving, repeatedly asking for assurances of love and forgiveness and so forth. These behaviors should not surprise us. Ritual is at the heart of every man-made attempt to quiet a guilty and fearful heart. You ever watch that show Monk? Right? Had to touch every post as he walked by it and things like this, right? A ritualistic. And if I didn't do it, I got to go back and do it, or else something bad's going to happen. And that's at the root of that is that if I don't do it like this, something bad will happen. Okay? It's superstitious. Destructive behaviors. Sinful self-inflicted injury, such as cutting, burning, banging your head against the wall, standing up for hours without moving, exercising to exhaustion, sticking pins into your body, pulling out your hair, pulling out eyebrows, starving yourself with anorexia, scratching your skin until it bleeds, and so forth because of fears and anxieties. And these are coping mechanisms. This is still what we're talking about, right? All of these are coping mechanisms for not dealing with fear and anxiety in a right manner. Avoidance behaviors. Doing anything to escape the feeling of being overwhelmed, escaping to isolation. I just can't be around anyone. Escape to pleasure. Sex, pornography, gambling, alcohol, drugs, risky behavior. In conclusion, anxiety is the fear that I will not get what I need or want, and it's driven by unbelief and discontent. And this is why anxiety is always portrayed in the Bible as a spiritual problem. It's a spiritual problem. And any solutions we pursue, therefore, must deal with the spiritual issue involved. And if this is not our approach, we can expect further isolation from God and further complications from our anxiety. Jeremiah chapter 2 and verse number 13 says, "My people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewn them out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water." We're not doing it God's way. Instead, we're trying this faulty method, whether it's through obsessive thinking, whether it's through perfectionist things, whether it's through compulsive or ritualistic behaviors, or whether it's through destructive behaviors. We're trying to cope with fear in the wrong way. And it's bringing more sorrow into our life. It brings more trouble into our life. And I wanted to point these things out because I feel like so often we don't associate many of these things with their root problem of fear and anxiety. And so you may have some of these areas in your life and didn't even realize that what you were doing is trying to cope with your anxiety and fear, because you still have anxiety and fear even though you're doing these things. But they are often that attempt, that method of coping. Ultimately, detrimental fear is the result of wrong thinking. It's imperative that if you're going to overcome fear in your life, you must accept that the way you've been thinking about things must change. The destructive coping mechanisms you've been using have only served to keep you from dealing with the actual source of the problem. Your coping mechanisms don't solve the problem. They create a dam of escape that causes others to think you're fine when behind the scenes you're becoming more and more out of control all the time. If you continue with your own coping mechanisms, you'll either destroy the loving relationships in your life, or you'll eventually have a mental breakdown, or both. And so, after a break here, we're going to start looking at the proper way to restructure thinking. Sometimes we're just looking at the other side of a bad situation. All right, let's take a 10-minute break.